appreciation for having such a great crowd tonight. It seems like each time we host one of these, we fill the room up more, so welcome again. As you know, Louisiana Cultural Vistas has been in publication for 24 years. I've been here for 21 of those years. And of course, we represent all things Louisiana, all the elements that make us unique. And that can include our state penitentiary at Angola. Last week I was interviewed on WWOZ radio to stir up some publicity about this event, and in advance of that the disc jockey played a recorded spiritual from prisoners at Angola, and in doing so I was really thinking to myself, how many prisons in America have ever been visited by a folklorist?
Parchment.
Yes, there are a few, but I have to say I think Angola stands relatively unique in that regard. Also, how many prisons in America actually have a public museum that can be visited as part of its history? Or a historic preservation project to renovate some of the original cell blocks, and much less an annual rodeo in which the general public are invited to come into the prison grounds to cheer convicts participating in cowboy competitions. So it's been said that Louisiana is unique in all the U.S., and like I said, I think our prison definitely qualifies. We're going to hear tonight from Gary Young. He is the public relations official at the Louisiana State Penitentiary. He's been employed in corrections for 20 years, and he's going to come to us today to describe some of the more unconventional projects that have been going on at Angola. For one, the restoration of the complex's first cell block, which was known as the Red Hat, and we featured a short story about that on page 76 of the most recent issue. And he's also going to touch on some news that was generated this last week. Angola has donated a guard tower and a cell block to the Smithsonian that will be going on view in the new Museum of African American History that I believe is due to open next year. So without any further ado, I welcome Gary Young to the stage.
Thank you. It's certainly our pleasure to be here, and I want to thank LEH for inviting us to come down. My good friend Deborah Luster is in the back. She's a wonderful photographer and one of our great friends at the prison. And talking about, before I get sidetracked, talking about unique experiences, we also have a Life of Christ play, which is incredible. First time last year it was done in prison at Angola, and first time in the country. It's an adaptation of a play from Scotland, promenade play, and we also incorporated about 25 to 30 female prisoners from LCIW, which is the Louisiana Correctional Institution for Women. Our next play is going to be in November, and it's moving. It's truly amazing. We even have a live camel that was donated to us for the play. But as the news channels say, our breaking news today is the Smithsonian project. I just left there about 4 hours ago, and this has been in the works for about, I guess for about 3 or 4 years. We've been in discussions with the Smithsonian to have them acquire one of our security towers. And the Smithsonian people are in place at the prison, and they're about, I just got an email about 20 minutes ago, they've added a third subcontractor. It's a huge proposition to do this. These are, total height of this facility is probably about 25 feet tall. It's made of solid concrete, and so they're in the process of now acquiring some special saws to cut it off the legs, lift it from the shack part of the tower part, lift that in one piece from the legs, place it on a flatbed, and it's going to Kentucky for restoration. And this will be into the new edition of the Smithsonian, the African American section, which is under construction on the mall in Washington now. And the total size of the facility is going to be about 400,000 square feet, so it's a huge facility. And our tower, and there's a rail car that they've acquired, will actually be in the basement. And it's going to be placed, it's going to be restored. It's going to be actually, along with the rail car, placed before final construction in the building will be built around it. So it's going to be a great, it's interesting because very few items really go from a prison to the Smithsonian, and particularly from Louisiana. It's a win-win for the entire state to have this thing in the Smithsonian, and we're very, very pleased with that. And generated a great deal of media. We've been in the New York Times with that. We've been on just about all of our local television stations from New Orleans to Baton Rouge across the state. But talking about the Red Hat, let me kind of set the stage and bring you up, give you some perspective about the prison. In 1869, Samuel James, who fought in the Civil War, obtained a lease from the state of Louisiana to house its inmates. In 1880, he bought 8,000 acres, which was the original Angola plantation. And he moved a number of the state's inmates to Angola. Samuel James had work camps set up all over the state. In South Louisiana, they cut sugarcane. North Louisiana, they picked cotton. They built levees. They built our original levee system at Angola in the late 1800s. We actually are surrounded on three sides by the river and have about 12 miles of levee system in Angola. They worked on a massive rail line that started out in Caddo Parish in northwest Louisiana, traversed the state, actually crossed the river on a steam vessel in Angola, was put back on the tracks and went to point south. The conditions were horrible though. Many, many, many people died under the James Watch. It was a horrible time in our history due to the very brutal conditions. Samuel James died in Angola in 1894, one of the wealthiest men in the state, based solely on the facts of convict labor. In 1901, the state came in and assumed control of the prison, so we've been run by Louisiana since 1901. And I talk to people literally from all over the world, and this is a Louisiana group, so you know what our history was. You know, throughout the years, Angola really was considered to be the bloodiest prison in America. Violence was horrible. In 1 year alone, in the 1970s, we had 40 inmates killed with inmate violence. Horrible. So the Red Hat came about because in 1933, Angola received a very high-profile inmate into the system. His name was Charlie Frazier, and he was an escape artist. So, Brian, help me with that. I told you I usually travel with my IT.
Gary's also a big reggae fan, so he's going to play some.
Some of our crowds are less forgiving. As you can tell, IT is not my deal. But the Red Hat was built in 1935. Charlie Frazier came in 1933. Charlie Frazier was a gangster. He was kind of brought up in the era of the Bonnie and Clyde era, and Bugsy McGlone. And according to Judge Ware, who's our great friend and was involved with a lot of the restoration, if you take all of the gangsters' rap sheets and combine them, they would not be anything compared to Charlie Frazier. He was horrible. So Charlie Frazier came in January of 1933. By April of that year, he masterminded really one of the worst escapes we've seen in prison history. We had 2 officers killed, inmates killed. Charlie Frazier ran all the way to Texas, and he assisted in a Texas death row escape. By the time he was finally caught and brought back to Louisiana, the Red Hat had been built to house inmates such as Charlie Frazier, very high security inmates. And this is some of the shots before the building was built. I want to get in and show you one of the cells. I think it was some inside cells. That's what some of the cells look like in that building. But when Charlie Frazier was brought back to Louisiana, he was such an escape risk that the administration of the day decided that we will not deal with Charlie Frazier leaving the prison again. So he was welded in one of those cells for about 7 years. And he died in Angola in 1959, an old man. He still wasn't welded in the cell. But the way the building got its name, if you were an inmate that was assigned to the red hat, your straw hat was taken, dipped in red dye, and that made for a better target out in the fields. Because at that point in our history, we had very few free people that actually worked at the prison. The great majority of the security was provided by inmate guards who were called khaki bags. And that was one of the things that led to the great violence and the brutality at the prison, because they would make for a better target out in the cane fields. Because Angola is 18,000 acres, surrounded on 3 sides by the Mississippi River. When the state assumed control of the prison in 1901, cotton was the crop of choice throughout this part of that part of Louisiana. Couldn't harvest a cotton crop in Angola because of the cotton boll weevil, so they converted the agricultural operations from cotton to sugarcane. So for many years, from the late 1907, 1908, up until the late 1960s, early 1970s, we raised almost all sugarcane at Angola, to the point of having our own sugar mill at Angola. So it's a very, very interesting place. And this is a Denman building that you saw at the first, one of the first shots, was the first site of the electric chair permanently housed in Angola. Late 1940s, hanging was still the means of execution in Louisiana. Early 1950s, the legislature passed a law to make electrocution the means of execution. For a number of years in the 50s, the electric chair was mobile. It went from parish to parish carrying out the executions. It was actually stored at Angola. Late 1950s, it was permanently housed here at the Red Hat. And so actually the Red Hat was really the first death row in the state of Louisiana. We currently use lethal injections as the means of execution, and that transaction took place in 1991. So it's a very, very interesting building, and currently, as those are some of it before, that was before it was restored, and we did do a great restoration project through our museum at Angola. You know, and to bring you up to speed on where we are now, we really are the largest maximum security prison in America. I tell people, and it's very, very true, we really are in one of our most peaceful, productive stages that we've ever been in. And Warden Kane attributes that to a great deal of the moral rehabilitation programs that are in place in prison. We can actually go with 6,300 inmates a whole weekend and not have any fights in prison. And it is because of the moral rehabilitation programs. And that's one of the reasons that Warden Kane and our administration is so adamant that we preserve our history so that we don't ever, or never, and it is on the National Register of Historic Places, we want to preserve our history so we don't make those same mistakes, so we don't go down that same path. Warden Kane says it very, very eloquently, and I'll surely lose something in the interpretation, but he said, you know, there's always ruts. You have two choices. You can follow in the same old ruts, or you can make new ruts. And so we try to make new ruts because we are now one of the most progressive programming prison in the country. And it is attributed to several things. It is behind prison walls we have an accredited branch campus of the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. We also have 5 interfaith chapels which are funded through the Louisiana Prison Chapel Foundation. So it is truly a very, very interesting prison. And I want to stop because I'm sure you have questions. So